Thank God for the retirement of the earlier Chief Justice, Justice Chandrachud, who I think was responsible for creating the mess in the country on places of worship. M.R. Shah said, Modi is my God. Now, technically, he was a good judge. Technically, he was a knowledgeable judge, hardworking judge. But we should have asked him immediately, Mr. Modi, the prime requirement for a judge of the Supreme Court is independence and the ability to speak the truth to justice, which means, sorry, sir, Mr. Executive, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Home Minister, this case before me, I'm going to hold against you. Courage. You don't just need brains, you need spine. And with Chandrachud, of course, I focused on, I have his repertoire of the 10 major sins, so to speak, judicial sins, if you can call it. And they were terrible. It had nothing to do with this puja. It had to do with his judgment on women, judgments on Manipur, judgments on the Chardham, judgments on climate change. He did pro government stuff after pro government stuff. And this is something for the media, while at the same time having a media kind of group put a spin on the judgment. When you see hate speech anywhere in the country, the authorities don't wait for somebody to file an FIR. Suo moto, the authority will register an FIR. Registry of the Supreme Court should have been instructed. Look at the speech. Should an FIR be registered against the judge? But what is the message at the end of it? You can say anything. You can say anything against Muslims. A High Court judge can say something about Muslims and how the majority section should always rule the country, etc., and get away with it. Stan Swami's death, 85 years. Trial doesn't begin. Parkinson's disease, asking for a sipper, denied. Dies. Isn't it obvious that the judges who refused him bail were responsible for his death? That these are the judges of this period, of the Modi period. These are the judges who kept our human rights activists in jail.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anjana Meenakshi for the News Minute. Today, we are doing a standalone interview with the Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, Mr. Colin Gonsalves. He is also the founder of the Human Rights Law Network. Mr. Gonsalves has worked on several important public interest litigations related to food security schemes, the deportation of refugees from India back to Myanmar, Rohingya refugees, and has also worked on the very important case and represented the victims of the Kandahar disaster, where 39 Christians were killed in Odisha. Aside from all this, over the last few years, he's been heavily critical of the functioning of the Indian judiciary. And that is exactly what we hope to speak to him about. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. So let's just get right into it. I want to start out by asking you about probably the most popular, mostly reported issue right now in the Supreme Court, the Places of Worship Act of 1991. And it truly blew up when former CJI D.Y. Chandrachud had an oral observation where he said that it is not against the act to ascertain the religious character of a place of worship. From then on, several trial courts and district courts in North and Southern India have taken that oral observation and used it as a precedent. Now, of course, it changed when the new CJI took over, Justice Khanna, who turned around and said that there is an interim stay on pending cases related to the Places of Worship Act, and no court is to entertain similar such cases about how Hindu religious institutions are being tampered with by or have been done away with by Mughal invaders. So how are we supposed to look at this change? Is this a change in the tune of the judiciary? Is that how we should be seeing it?
Not the judiciary, really. I must say, thank God for the arrival of the new Chief Justice, Sanjeev Khanna. And thank God for the observations that he made. Typical, he's very down to earth in that sense. He says things that he means to say. And thank God for the retirement of the earlier Chief Justice, Justice Chandrachud, who I think was responsible for creating the mess in the country on places of worship. And you mentioned that he said some things, so to speak, off the cuff, some remarks that he made. He was quite well known for that. He would pass a judgment, and in the course of making that judgment, or dealing with advocates across the bar, he would make statements that were very damaging, and he did it in case after case. And here, while he pretended in his written judgment to actually not allow any further change in the status quo of places of worship, he actually indicated a way of how to reopen it all across the country. And if you ask him,
To be fair, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to be fair, it was an oral observation. Is it all right for lower courts to take an oral observation as a precedent? Is that something which is accepted or in accordance with
I
how the
was
law
about to
operates?
say this, I anticipated
Yeah.
your question. You see, it's the classic defense. I may have said some things, but what matters is what I write, not what I say. Classic defense. And the courts should not allow, and the journalists and others should not allow a judge to get away like this, because what you say is more damaging, is more effective than what you write. What you ultimately write, people may read or not read, but what you say is covered in headlines across the country. Covered in headlines. It becomes the law in the sense that lower courts follow it. Yes, we read in the newspapers that the court said this and the chief justice said this and the chief justice knows that if he's not intending to say something in his written judgment, he's not allowed to say something orally. It's not as if he doesn't know. Every seasoned judge knows what you say orally has tremendous weight in this country, and rightly so. You are not allowed to say something contrary to your judgment orally and then sit back and say, oh, but I didn't say so in writing. So that's what he did. That's why I feel, I'm happy to have him, he's retired, and with him, he's taken this mess. And I'm hopeful that the new Chief Justice, by the way in which he acts and talks straightforward, I'm hopeful that he will put an end to this nonsense. Easy to do. It's a 1 day job in the court. Stop everything and freeze the situation and bring the country, take the first step towards bringing the country on the secular track. Hopeful.
Judges are one thing, but we're not just looking at judges right now, right? Like we see several advocates who are very evidently pro establishment, pro the executive, the union government, who speak sometimes in unconstitutional ways about several cases which are going on in the Supreme Court. We have seen very many advocates who are immensely popular, have an almost influencer like aura about them, who are speaking against the Places of Worship Act. So, is this a trend you believe to be new? Is this something which has happened in the past, or is it just a completely new phenomena that we see today of advocates behaving this way?
It's not entirely new, but the expanse and the intensity is somewhat new, because the central government and the is trying to influence the legal community for many years. It's had a lot of years in power, and the advocates are naturally drifting towards any government that will allow them profile growing, and cases from the government and so on. So the right wing in the legal fraternity, which is expanding enormously, is becoming articulate, and they're attacking the act. I would say that as long as that attack is within, not inclusive of hate speech and so on, I would say they attack the act and so on. It's legitimate part of freedom of speech and expression. As you know, I also criticize the judiciary quite a bit, but I've never been anti-judiciary, because the judiciary is the only lifeline for human rights and people in distress. We're trying to shore it up, we're trying to strengthen it, not weaken it. But if certain organizations of the right wing lawyers are criticizing the act, let them do so. Let them do so. What is the Chief Justice of India going to do? That's the question. Is he going to stand firm? Is he going to stick by his constitutional duty? Is he going to say, irrespective of this kind of public opinion, I am going to say enough is enough? Stop it. No place of worship will have its identity changed, and certainly not by force, like they did with the Babri Masjid. And if he had further integrity and courage, I would say, he would say, although there is a five judge bench constitutional judgment on Babri Masjid, I would say that I don't agree with that judgment at all. I am bound by it, but I don't agree with you saying it was perfectly legal for the Babri Masjid judgment to be pulled down by hooligans and then taken over. If he had that would take real courage. But I think our Chief Justice has enough courage to do the bare minimum, which is stop any further rotting in the system.
All right. That is, I think, something we will wait and see how it progresses. We hope you're right. But continuing on judges, and we have been heavily critical of several judges, for instance, Justice Arun Mishra, for their proximity to the executive, for their open praise of the prime minister and the union government, right? But this is not really a new phenomenon. We've seen this happen before. Justice P.N. Bhagwati, for instance, wrote a letter in open praise of Indira Gandhi when she was the prime minister. So, what is one could turn around very easily and argue that this attack on the judiciary is at this point just maybe on some level slightly hypocritical of the media or slightly not in keeping with the history of how Indian judiciary has panned out. So what is the brand new criticism here? What is the difference between what happened under Mrs. Gandhi and what's happening now?
Not much difference in effect, but enormous difference in the way in which judges have become very close to the executive. You had judges earlier who, were very close to the executive, made it very clear, got away with it. And they get away with it because lawyers are afraid to identify individual judges and criticize them. And the media is deadly afraid. Media will not touch, the media is not what it used to be. Not even 20% of what it used to be once upon a time. It's a very supine and servile media because the editors at the top and the owners of the newspapers prevent young and dynamic journalists from writing anything. You have to write the usual rubbish. You can't do the stuff that used to be done, years ago. But now it has become like a very dangerous thing. And unless you catch the judge with what he says and holds him accountable, they will keep on because they've got away with it. M.R. Shah said, Modi is my God. Now, technically, he was a good judge. Technically, he was a knowledgeable judge, hardworking judge. But we should have asked him immediately, Mr. Modi, the prime requirement for a judge of the Supreme Court is independence and the ability to speak the truth to justice, which means, sorry, sir, Mr. Executive, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Home Minister, this case before me, I'm going to hold against you. Courage. You don't just need brains, you need spine. Spine is missing. Now, what's happened in the recent past is the influx of pro government kind of judges who can never take the government to task on serious matters, on semi serious matters, who could never take the government to task. That has corroded the spine of the judiciary and it's come almost to crumbling point. So, what the media needs to do, what lawyers need, you must know, you must see each appointment and track that. Who is this person? Because we look at their Facebook accounts, for example. It's amazing what kind of stuff they've done on Facebook, what kind of stuff they've said, what kind of history, political history they have. And you put them into a constitutional position with the agenda of doing something unconstitutional in the constitutional bodies. Arun Mishra, of course, was very again a very good judge in many ways, but a man who was very openly, let's say, inclined towards the. And look at Victoria, Justice Victoria in the Madras High Court. There are two types of terrorism: white and green. Green is a Muslim, and white is Christian. And white is worse than green because white terrorism have libraries and educational institutions and hospitals. What kind of hate speech? Incredible.
I suppose it is. And but another thing, when we speak about the proximity or towing the line of the executive, we also end up speaking about Justice Ranjan Gogoi, who became a Rajya Sabha MP member soon after he retired as the CGI, right? And again, like I'm inclined to prod you towards a similar line of questioning and say this again isn't a new phenomena, right? Like Justice Ranganath Mishra was became a Rajya Sabha member under the UPA. But I suppose the difference is it was 7 years after he retired. So what are we criticizing here? Are we criticizing that there A isn't enough cooling off period? Or are we criticizing that even with a cooling off period, judges have no business joining the executive in any which way or the parliament in any which way?
I think that would be the best, to have no retirement benefits in terms of becoming head of the NHRC and becoming head of so many government bodies that have proliferated, where you retain your status as a High Court judge and Supreme Court judge. That's the bargaining chip. So you continue in your bungalow, you continue with your cars, you continue with your staff, and you live quite a glorious life. One is to stop it completely, but side by side with that, because one fact is that which we don't recognize, which we don't really relate to and deal with, is the fact that judges are paid very poorly in this country, very very poorly. And if you're an honest, no, I don't think. I don't think. And I think it's a fundamental flaw that we have betrayed our judiciary in not taking up cudgels on their behalf. And look at the salary of judges as compared to judges abroad and so on. It's a pittance. And don't forget our judges. I'm on a program supposed to be critical. Also, the kind of work they do till 2 o'clock in the morning and can get up at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. But this closeness with with the executive is a planned closeness. The executive has worked it out in finite details so that they know how to trap judges in this web of becoming very pally with the executive. So much so that we hear very alarming things of certain persons in power, including certain law officers. It's called, in America, they call it ex parte communications with the judge. Namely, the judge is not supposed to be on the telephone talking to a big shot when he's a sitting judge. And we believe that there is something growing which nobody talks about. And that is like a cancer growing which nobody wants to identify. You remember Arvind Kejriwal at the 50th celebration of the Delhi High Court. He said in front of all the dignitaries, "What is this I hear? Judges are telling me that their phones are tapped." And judges are scared that their phones are tapped. Can you imagine? Before all the dignitaries in the country sitting in the High Court celebrating, he openly said what everyone is saying.
I suppose the common excuse for the proximity, it's not one of the questions I had planned, but the common excuse for the proximity is also that it's cultural, which is the defense which many gave in favor of Justice Chandrachud when the Prime Minister was at his place for the Ganesh Chaturthi Puja, right? That it's a cultural thing. What do you do? Somebody drops by, you say hello. So is that also an ex parte, a part of ex parte communication which should never be happening to begin with?
See, first of all, it's not cultural, it's most uncultured. In judicial culture, it's the most uncultured thing you do, that you become very pally with the executive. Very bad. And in fact, a judge is supposed to be very stoic and, very stiff and prim and proper when it comes to the executive. To say it's a cultural thing to, hobnob with the judges is ridiculous. It's not cultural at all. As far as the incident of, that puja thing, there's a very simple thing. I mean, I didn't, in my criticism, which I did in the media after he retired, I didn't even refer to that. I didn't refer. It's very significant, and I believe what the advocates said and so on, what the wire and so on carried was very good in the finest traditions of journalism. But it's not a culture thing at all, and it's not permissible at all for this kind of thing to happen. We have to be very strident in our separatedness. And with Chandrachud, of course, I focused on, I have his repertoire of the 10 major sins, so to speak, judicial sins, if you can call it, And they were terrible. It had nothing to do with this puja. It had to do with his judgment on women, judgments on Manipur, judgments on the Chardham, judgments on climate change. He did pro government stuff after pro government stuff. And this is something for the media, while at the same time having a media kind of group put a spin on the judgment. I mean, this is new. It started with Mr. Ramana, I think, Chief Justice Ramana. He had his pictures coming and his press statements and his lectures at colleges. I mean, come on, all this banal and rubbish stuff should stop. And we Indians should learn to talk to the point, touch the nerve of the point. And with Chandrachud, there was a spin. Every judgment you'll see what has he done in writing, and then you see what the press is carrying, cover page news on what the judgment means, and his total spin. You never get to learn what is the court actually doing.
But even outside the court, we see you spoke about Justice Victoria Gauri of the Madras High Court, but a more recent example would also be Justice Shekhar Kumar Yadav of the Allahabad High Court, who had who had made very evidently Islamophobic remarks. There's no other way to put it. What impact do such statements have, do you think, on the public outside of the judiciary? We spoke about how the judiciary in of itself has changed, but for the common public, what impact do you think this has?
See, for the common public, it means you can say anything and get away with it. Look at the drama that happened after that. It's again spin. It's again spin, judicial spin. Oh, we called him. We asked him here. We talked to him. We explained our, disapproval of what he said. We needed to find out from him what he had to say. But why? It's a crime. It's a crime. Hate speech is a crime. The first thing that the registry of the Supreme Court should do is, on the instructions of the Chief Justice, to register an FIR. There's a Supreme Court judgment after judgment on this. When you see hate speech anywhere in the country, the authorities don't wait for somebody to file an FIR. Suo moto, the authority will register an FIR. Registry of the Supreme Court should have been instructed. Look at the speech. Should an FIR be registered against the judge? If yes, if it discloses a cognizable offense, register the FIR. Then, under the Veeraswamy judgment, you have to go to the Chief Justice and say, Sir, do we have your authorization to proceed? Then the ball is in the Chief Justice's court. Should I say yes? Should I say no? Everything has huge implications. But this is the thing spine is made up of. And then the Chief Justice should say, yes, proceed. Proceed with the trial. Instead of which we have this drama of calling him. But what is the message at the end of it? You can say anything. You can say anything against Muslims. A High Court judge can say something about Muslims and how the majority section should always rule the country, etc., and get away with it. Another abject surrender of our judiciary.
I had to, at this point, since we are speaking, I cover the states of Telangana and Andhra, and a major human rights phase, even outside of these two states, has been Professor Dr. G.N. Saibaba. And probably one of the most shocking UAPA cases we've seen in this country. And I still remember that there was a Supreme Court in 2022. They heard a discharge petition for his against Sai Baba's acquittal, and it was scheduled on a Saturday. And many have argued that this is highly unusual. But we look at cases like GN Sai Baba, we look at cases like Father Stan Swami. Could you speak more about? You recently delivered a lecture where you criticized the judiciary and you said the judges are murderers, right? Now, why would we pin the blame on the judges and not just
I didn't actually use those words, but you come a little close to it. But I didn't actually use those words. But I appreciate what you said.
you
Yes,
pin the blame for their demise on the judges?
yes, I did. Yes.
And why would you do that if, and it's always been a state repression problem. That's how we've spoken of UAP or the mismanagement of the investigative agencies. Why specifically are we looking at, are you so heavily critical of the judges itself?
Because, see, the state can't get away with human rights violations. The state can't get away with the death of human rights activists, unlawful death of human rights activists, unless the judiciary plays ball. And I think the time has come to get rid of this anonymity which surrounds the judgment. You do something in court, you're a judge, you're fallible. I understand it. You're fallible. You make a mistake. And in that mistake, a person dies. And enlightened opinion would say that this mistake was pretty palpable, pretty obvious. Stan Swami's death, 85 years, trial doesn't begin. Parkinson's disease, asking for a sipper, denied, dies. Isn't it obvious that the judges who refused him bail were responsible for his death? Sai Baba. The High Court, I must say, the glory of the High Court and these judges, two judges at the first round cleared him. Then, then that famous bench which sat on Saturday, as you mentioned, sent him back from the jail, from the gate of the jail. Never done, never done. Widely commented. I won't repeat that comment. And again, two judges. Brilliant judgments. Brilliant. Judges standing firm against the Supreme Court that is behaving badly, wrongly, illegally, and acquitted him again. And when it comes to the Supreme Court again in the third round, the Supreme Court says, we cannot find, Mr. Government Counsel, we cannot find anything in this judgment that is wrong, acquitting Sai Baba. It's such a well written judgment. Can you imagine? Now, if that's not a condemnation of you keeping Sai Baba in jail and him dying a short while later after release, if that is not the best condemnation that the judges who denied him bail, you did something terrible in your lives. Now, judges are not accountable. Nobody knows who are the persons. They say Supreme Court did this. Nobody knows the names of these people, the pictures of these people. It's accountability of a undemocratic sort. When Pinochet in Chile, for example, kills so many people and ultimately, he dies with that stigma. But you can, as a judge, you can also do that kind of wrongdoing and should be identified that these are the judges of this period, of the Modi period. These are the judges who kept our human rights activists in jail. Human rights activists like the Bhima Koregaon people never picked a gun, never threw a bomb, never advocated violence, only offered legal aid and to the tribals and so on and so forth, and who had a very strident voice for which you kept them in jail and they died in jail. That accountability must go. You must be known, and oh, you're Justice so and so. After retirement, when he, oh, you're the man who kept Sai Baba in jail. Oh, you're the man who kept Stan in jail and he died. I see, sir. Don't you feel sorry for what you did? Don't you feel sorry? And last of all, say sorry. Say sorry. Judiciary must learn. A retired judge must learn. He's, after all, going to see his maker now. He's going to, hopefully, that I'll get moksha. You know, I'm sorry. As a judge, I presided over the bench. I gave this judgment, and the man died. And now, in retrospect, I'm sorry, it's too late. I can't bring him back. I was wrong. People of India, I was wrong. And I want all judges to remember their duty to acknowledge their mistake as a judge, which had traumatic consequences. I was wrong. I'm sorry.
Why do you think a very commonly known, even for people who aren't lawyers like me, that bail is the exception, jail is the exception and bail is the norm? Why do you think that was done away with in cases like these? It was understood that you grant people bail. Why do you think it was done away with?
Yeah, I was. I was actually. I also had a case which came before the court, and I was actually quite upset where the judges said that in the UAPA cases, it should be jail as the norm and bail the exception. Now look at that. Two judges of the courts going against such a long tradition of judgments. Bail is the rule. They said jail is the rule. In 2024, they said jail is the rule. And you must understand one thing about UAPA cases. You see, it's not the charge that you level. I'm leveling a terrorism charge. It's not that. Is there material to justify such a charge? So in all these cases, Khalid and so on, and Sudha Bharadwaj, you level serious charges. The fact that you level serious charges can't bring this ultimate punishment that you will never be granted. You must look and see, is there material? And in all
No, the
these cases,
material has, for the most part, been, at least in a few cases I'm familiar with. In Mr. Saibaba's case, the material was that they used bananas and umbrella, which is a classic defining motif of Maoists to communicate with each other, and that is proof of their culpability, or that is
yeah.
proof of guilt. So, at least in the few cases I've seen, that there has not been, the evidence has been flimsy at best, even with the cursory reading, understanding of the law, right? But that seems to be something which the judiciary has agreed with. The evidence is something they seem to be all right with, from the top down to the bottom below.
Except few. You must always put in that caveat. Even to today, during the darkest period of the Modi regime, there were judges who, very fine judges, who didn't succumb on bail. Other things maybe, but on bail they remained firm. There was a little ray of light, not too much of it, a little ray of right, piercing through the dark clouds and saying, bail granted, bail granted, bail granted, bail granted. And just one more, just one. The same judges, I mean, and the same institution which said, sorry, we cannot grant bail, this is a UAPA case, you'll have to go to trial. 4 years later, when the trial hadn't even begun, the same judges, the same institution looked at the papers and said, there is no material, there is no material, there is no material. So why didn't you say so day one? Day one, you're looking at the same papers. There's not adequate material. We are not satisfied. Bail granted. Day one.
I These are the main questions I wanted to ask you on the nature of the judiciary, but I'd just like to conclude by asking you a couple of things. One is Professor Mohan Gopal has spoken about how several problems in the judiciary and in our judicial system would be solved if there was more diversity in the judiciary, because the diversity is negligible, right? We barely see any diversity. It's upper caste judges, mostly men who rule the roost. Do you agree with this view that diversity in the judiciary could possibly solve the problems we are seeing today?
See, very partly, because I think this is a very superficial analysis, the routine kind of analysis done. Of course, if 50% were women, it'll make a change. If 25% were Dalit and tribal and so on and so on, it'll make a change, no doubt. But the real diversity you want of people who have lived and worked among people in their lives as a lawyer. I worked in the trade union movement. I worked in the Dalit rights movement. I worked in the demolition movement. Today I go to demolition sites. I see the world differently. And when I look at the judges, once upon a time I could take judges with me on a fact finding mission. While they were sitting judges, they would go, you know, they would come to areas where communal strife had taken place. They would sit among the people with the ashes of their houses around, and they would write People's Tribunal, People's Reports, PUCL reports, and so on. Judges were compatible and comfortable with ordinary human beings relating their grief to these judges. But today you can't find any. This is the globalized generation of judges. After independence, the pro-independence movement, how we got rid of the British, good period. Emergency after emergency, how we got rid of the emergency and got rid of Indira Gandhi, and now the globalized period. They don't want to hear what your problems are. They don't care about labor rights, Dalit rights, tribal rights, disability rights, LGBTQ. Care. All that they care about, really speaking, commercial law, arbitration law, insolvency law, and all that kind of stuff. Good stuff. But should that be the core concern of your Supreme Court of India? Look at the cases coming up before the court. All the human rights cases, large bulk, at the bottom of the heap, will come up after 5 years or 10 years, by which time the clients are all dead. It's becoming a redundant institution for the people of India. And some Chief Justice of India should come along soon, and say, let's review. Let's talk to the human rights lawyers who practice in our courts, ask them for their point of view. How cases can be brought to the surface once again for the consideration of the court. Not just Richie Rich cases, so to speak.
Lastly, sir, I want to ask you about a fundamental change in the judicial system right now. In comparison to how much we saw of it earlier, we don't see as many public interest litigations being taken up by the courts. It's like you dubbed it the Richie Rich phenomenon. Why do you think that's happening? What do you think that means for the judiciary and the country and its functioning at large? Because earlier we would see more cases of bonded labor, of Dalit atrocities being taken up.
See, all the cases of the past are even more relevant today. Bondage has gone up, demolitions have gone up, poverty and hunger is going up, even though the government tries to hide it with all this, unscrupulous data and so on. Violence against women, violence against Dalits, eviction of tribals from forests going on a massive scale, environmental degradation going on a massive scale. Are the lawyers available to do it? Yes, they are. But is the court willing to hear? No, it isn't. Judges have become, I would say, almost contemptuous of people doing public interest work. Almost contemptuous, except for a handful. I remember a judge telling me recently in 2023, demolition case, rehabilitation of slum dwellers, the most cruel thing in this country to demolish their houses as if we are in apartheid South Africa. I have never, Mr. Gonsalves, in my life, ever given a stay order on demolition. These persons are encroachers. And I thought to myself, this is the globalized generation. They don't share the pain and anger and frustration and the desperation of the poor. They don't feel it at all. They're just in their own world of power and glory of being a high court judge. Transient power, which God gave them for a few years of their lives, and they lose their heads. I heard that from judges. I struggle in public interest litigation, even though I know the views of judges, and I'm having the most difficult time today than I've ever had in my 30-year, 35-year career. I've never had to struggle on things that are so evident, so obvious, that the earlier judges will say, Mr. Gonsalves, good case, good point, good petition, we'll hear this. No effort, right? You just drafted it well and came to court, and the judge gave you a pat on your back and sent you with issue notice and so on. But today, you have to struggle and fight and argue and argue. It's a terrible time for the judiciary. It's almost the end, I would say. It's coming rapidly to the end. And if this government continues for some more years and appoints more judges, it'll be dead. It'll be totally dead. But who is there in the Supreme Court? Is there any judge in the Supreme Court who raises up, strident concerns about the irrelevance of the court today and its attitude towards the poor? I don't think. I don't think. I think everyone's happy. I'll go to my 2 years, 3 years term. I'll pass my orders. I'll retire. I'll get a post-retirement arbitration work and so on. The judges are so busy today in post-retirement arbitration because earlier I would take them the moment they retire. I would take them to tribal areas, these areas, those areas. Oh, and they would happily come and write reports after retirement. I would say, all right, forget during your period of work, but after retirement, I can't find a single one today. So it's the end of the judiciary, almost the death of the judiciary. From the point of view of human rights, of course, judiciary to be alive for commercial work and property matters and excise and taxation and this and that. It's all right.
I suppose right now we can look at it as self-evident truths aren't as self-evident anymore. And but thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr.
Thank you.
Gonzalez. And I would like to remind every single person watching this interview that just like an independent judiciary matters, in equal measure, so does an independent media. And if that is something you value, I'd like to remind you once again that the News Minute does not take money from corporates, does not take money from anybody except its subscribers, and we are completely committed to public interest. And if you value that, then please subscribe to the News Minute and pay to keep news free. Thank you so much for watching us.